Welcome to the Bush Air Podcast, episode number 4. I'm CC Pocock. In episode 2, I explained how to correctly configure your aircraft's center of gravity, apply optimum lift flap setting, perform an optimum performance takeoff, and determine your aircraft's optimum performance takeoff speed. Now that we have recorded that indicated airspeed for future reference, let's talk about how to properly configure your airplane and perform an optimum performance takeoff basically every time you take off. Remember, always try to operate your airplane with an optimum center of gravity and use the optimum lift flap setting for every takeoff. These two factors will help you achieve the best possible performance. An optimum performance takeoff is a precision takeoff that will allow the aircraft to become airborne when it is ready to fly, rather than using the common sloppy technique of accelerating to a indicated airspeed that you read about in the POH, or maybe an instructor told you is the right speed to use. And then when you see that airspeed appear on the ASI, you pull back on the yoke or stick. That method often wastes valuable runway and results in longer than necessary takeoff rolls. Far too many pilots use excessively high takeoff speeds, forcing the aircraft to remain on the runway much longer than is necessary. The most common reason for this bad habit often stems from being afraid of stalling after takeoff, or simply poor instruction or advice from an instructor who doesn't really know the aircraft that they're flying. When doing a proper optimum performance takeoff, you will notice that it is actually quite short. In fact, probably much shorter than your normal takeoffs. And probably as short as, if not shorter, than when you try to do an actual short field takeoff according to the normal flight school or POH method. I will talk about proper short field techniques in a later episode, maybe even the next one. To perform an optimum performance takeoff, first select the optimum lift flap setting. Optimum lift flap is the flap setting that will generate a lot more lift than drag during the initial takeoff roll. Normally, this is around first notch, sometimes even second notch, or 10 to 20 degrees if a Fowler flap. For example, Cessnas have very good Fowler flaps, very efficient, especially the older models, especially those with 40 flap. After applying optimum lift flap, then apply what I call elevator, or rather, let's use the word optimum again, optimum elevator deflection angle. Optimum elevator deflection angle. In a nose wheel airplane, this is typically no more than about 10 degrees of up elevator deflection. That's about half full elevator deflection, roughly equivalent to a fully deflected aileron. Some aircraft may be slightly different. And just before I carry on, a problem I've come across in the past, especially with the Cessnas, many times, especially the older ones, especially aircraft or the Cessnas that have had their tail sections removed for an SB or AD or whatever the case, and pretty much all of them have. A&Ps that do not fly themselves, I have found this. Sometimes, students bring a Cessna to me. It could be anything, a 170, a 172, a 180, 82, 206, whatever. They're all the same. And we find this problem. And it's a rigging problem. Be very, very careful, especially when you're doing the test to determine if your center of gravity, or rather if the ballast that you got in the back of the aircraft is sufficient to create optimum center of gravity. Sometimes I've found, you have to put a lot of weight in the back of the aircraft and be still running out of CG. And the aircraft is still nose heavy. When we actually find out that the elevator is not rigged right. In other words, when you pull back on the stick, the elevator is not going all the way up. And another problem is the trim tab, which is not going down far enough. So make sure that when you pull the stick back, that your elevator goes all the way to the stop and there's no play there. And the trim tab is rigged right as well. So sometimes you trim all the way back and the trim tab's not going all the way down. And then it gives you the same sensation, the same feel that, you're still nose heavy, you need more weight in the back of the aircraft, when that's not the case. It's simply a rigging problem on your elevator or your trim tab. Just something to keep in mind for those of you that have got fairly old Cessna airplanes, especially if you've had your tail section, the elevator or the tail being removed for some other mandatory maintenance or modifications. And sometimes when it's put back together again, it's slightly out. The rigging is out. Okay, let's move on. In a tailwheel aircraft, begin the takeoff roll with the stick. Just do a normal procedure in a tailwheel aircraft. Begin with the takeoff roll with the stick back, slightly aft and neutral, whatever. And with tailwheel aircraft, you got to remember that they require special consideration during the takeoff roll. Because the tail dragger center of gravity is located behind the main wheels, it has a much greater tendency to yaw left during the takeoff roll than a nose wheel aircraft. As a result, more active and more right rudder control is required to maintain directional control. Tailwheel aircraft are also more affected by engine torque, propeller P factor, the propeller slipstream over the tail, and especially gyroscopic precession when the tail is raised early in the takeoff run. Something nose wheel pilots are not familiar with, at least those that haven't flown tailwheel airplanes. Smooth power application, early right rudder input, and continuous right rudder pressure, and raising the tail at the right moment will help minimize all of these effects. Raising the tail too early can significantly increase gyroscopic precession and yaw to the left, making directional control more difficult and potentially compromising the takeoff. Okay, now let's do the takeoff. Let's talk about the takeoff. You release the brakes, you smoothly apply power, and in a nose wheel airplane, as airflow over the horizontal stabilizer increases, it begins to force the elevator downwards, causing the stick or yoke to move forward. So be aware of that. Maintain the desired elevator position. Maintain that back pressure. You may need to apply increasing back pressure during the takeoff roll. If you don't, the nose may not rise when it should, causing the aircraft to remain on the runway longer than necessary. Allow the nose to rise slightly and simply hold that attitude. The aircraft will lift off when it is ready to fly. In a tailwheel aircraft, allow the tail to rise naturally when it is ready. You can raise it slightly further if required, but trying to force the tail up too early again only increases gyroscopic precession, creates unnecessary drag, lengthens the takeoff roll, and requires additional rudder and possibly braking input to maintain directional control, which is going to extend the takeoff roll. In both nose wheel and tailwheel aircraft, you can delay liftoff slightly and allow a small increase in airspeed over and above the optimum performance indicated takeoff speed for your aircraft. This will give you a more positive liftoff. And this is especially important during gusty windy conditions. This is often the technique that we use, the technique that everybody was taught. Add half the gust factor to your airspeed during the takeoff or your approach. But remember, add half the gust factor to your optimum indicated airspeed. Your optimum indicated airspeed for your aircraft, not the POH speed or the instructor takeoff speed. Now, immediately after takeoff, lower the nose and allow the aircraft to accelerate as quickly as possible to your desired climb speed. And that is it. It's as simple as that. That's how we perform an optimum performance takeoff. You'll be surprised at how much shorter your takeoffs become when using this technique. However, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a short field takeoff procedure. Even though it's going to be a lot shorter than what you're used to, it's not short field. We'll talk about proper short field and how much shorter your short field will become by using more extreme techniques and procedures. But again, we'll discuss that in maybe the next episode. Remember, the key to a successful optimum performance takeoff is four things actually. Optimum center of gravity, optimum lift flap setting, optimum control surface deflection, and optimum performance indicated airspeed. That's it. Or optimum performance indicated takeoff speed, rather. So I hope you found this info useful. If you like this episode, please like it and subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. And until next time, practice and fly safe.